Now we are going to have an Ask the Experts session now, which will be just open to any general question at all. So if you have any general question about DNA at all, then please do ask those questions. Gerard, can I ask you to come up as well and be part of the panel? You guys have to stay.
Sure, why not? Thanks for letting us go over so much. Thank you.
Great, so we have a general question.
I've attended many of these DNA lectures, and you talk about, I think they're called STRs, and their numbers, and people are clumping them. You know, someone will do 37 markers on a Y DNA, and the first number will be, say, 11, the next one's 12, but now you have 20 people. So the first marker will be 11, and you'll clump them up here, the first 10, and then the next, you know, it mutates to 12, and you guys create another second group. But then you have a third group at the bottom where they started as 11, but they're clumped down here in a new group. How do you determine which group to put everybody in?
Yeah. Well, first of all, when you say you, they're coming from the FDDNA database, and they simply put them out in the tables in numerical order. That's the basic. So if you go into any surname project, into the Y-DNA results table, that's how they're arranged in numerical order. So you'll always see all on the very first marker, which is DYS 391, whatever it is. You'll see the first number, 13 or 11s, in order by that. And if they're all the same, you'll see it in order of the second number. So it's simply a database sort by number as you're going left to right. Now what we do in administrators do within their own projects is break them into subgroups. Now in the subgroups, and these are still available on the results table, but we determine what the subgroups should be, and we assign particular records to particular subgroups. Within those subgroups, because it's coming automatically from a database, they will still be ranged as by the first column with the lowest number, and so on, and if they're all equal, the second column. But we'll have arranged it in subgroups. If we go beyond the computer-generated tables, some of us then, within those subgroups, might reorder them into clusters. So we might actually be effectively taking further subgroups, or we might put those subgroups on the website. We might say, no, let's order them within these clusters. I certainly do it for McCarthy's. I break down the subgroup, not on the internet site provided by FDDNA, but I break them down into clusters, which helps the further subdivide. But basically, the numbers you're seeing are computer-generated from a database, and they're put out in numerical order, and that's the way they are when you see them.
But why are you clumping them the way you are? What do you see that nobody else is seeing?
Because we are looking. I mean, you take. We talk largely about L21. For L21, we go back, whatever the period is, 4,000 years, 5,000 years, to when people suggest L21 occurred. And we have what we call the modal haplotype for L21, which is the majority of the numbers at each marker. So that is our baseline for using STRs with L21. And that gives us a baseline, and from that we determine anything that's different from that baseline is a mutation away from what was L21. It's also very similar. It's called the Atlantic modal haplotype. So we work away from that. And when we have particular clusters of mutations, like in 6 or 7 different places, we've talked about the South Irish haplotype. That has a 10 instead of 11 at 385A. It has a 11 instead of 12 at 439. It has a 24 instead of 25 at DYS 447, and so on. And if we go across 111 markers, we know there's there are 12 locations where mutations away from L21 occurred. And they give us a guide to, for okay, everybody that's got all those mutations, or most of them, say 10 out of 12, we would predict will be in that group. And we put them in that South Irish or Irish type 2 cluster. And that's how we do it. And other people do it similarly with all sorts of things. And we will predict, even though FTDNA won't make that prediction to such a fine level, but with that cluster, we would predict, on the basis of what we now know, that they will all test positive for CTS 4466 at SMP, plus 3 or 4 other SMPs that are similar. We're waiting for somebody to trip us up, test negative for one of them. That will be a great day, because we can then start to say, I said SMPs are a marker in the sand, and if somebody tests negative on one of those, even though their STRs look like they follow the pattern, we know this is the point at which the tree divides. We're waiting for that day. It's going to come one day. So we're actually trying to get people to test, just taking this South Irish or Irish type 2 example, we're trying to get people to test now who a little bit away, maybe out of the 12 STR markers, they've only got 8 of them. Because maybe they branched off the tree a little further back. You know, if we said that well, the South Irish haplotype was formed around about 100 AD or something, we're looking for people maybe that branched off it before then. If that's the case, they may have 3 of those SMPs, the CTS ones, but not the 4th one. We don't know what order they occurred in. We don't know whether they happened. They may have all occurred simultaneously, but in which case we won't. But until somebody comes up with a negative, we're not actually learning any more than we've learned the last 6 months. So that's why sometimes negative tests on SMPs are absolutely vital.
Right. Got a question over here.
Does Family Tree do the SMP test?
Oh, yes. And if you're interested and you're tested, we can give you directions on how to find out how to order the test if you're interested.
Hello. I have a very simplistic question. My name is O'Brien, and my aunt married an O'Mahony early in the last century. Now, I know I had worked out the O'Brien history, and I have the birthdays going back to 1825. I have birth certificates and marriage certificates. But when my aunt married an O'Mahony, and they were living in the same townland, her husband was able to tell her that an O'Brien had married in 3 generations before that, and that the land had gone, part of the land had gone to the O'Briens, and the rest remained with the O'Mahonys. Now my question is, because based on again, a simple question asked by the lady opposite, so I picked up that the Y DNA would be present in my first cousin O'Mahony's, who are now in their 80s, but it would be gone from all future generations. Is that right? There would be no track of the Y DNA in the O'Mahony. It would be present. It's not present in the first cousins, or it is?
No.
No.
It will be present. Let me get this very clear. The DNA follows the line. It doesn't follow the name. So
yes.
If there were O'Briens who married in, they would have brought the O'Brien DNA, which is Irish type 3. Yeah. If they were O'Mahony, usually, usually, we have to qualify. If there were O'Mahonys of the Irish type 2 who married into the O'Brien land, they still kept the Y DNA of the O'Mahony type 2. Now, it's only the males that carried on that Y DNA.
Oh, I thought you had said that for 1 generation. It
was,
no,
absolutely. No, it's the mitochondrial DNA.
Oh, sorry.
That's the mtDNA from the...
Yes.
So I have my mother's mtDNA. Okay. But my son has my wife's mtDNA. So that's very important. But fascinating that you should have O'Mahonys who married into the O'Briens or vice versa.
Well, it was the second, that the O'Briens were tailors and they married into the land. But then 3 generations later, my aunt married someone, and they all lost their land just over 100 years ago. Both actually were for various reasons, mainly drink. They lost both lots of land.
I represent that remark. Second time, it's very important though, there's a massive swathe of Irish type 3 O'Mahonys in that territory, and that possibly is one of the explanations that would account for it. Yeah.
I would just like to add that in your particular case, if your family would take the family finder test, that would grasp both the O'Mahony heritage as well as the O'Brien heritage. So it doesn't have to necessarily follow the male line with family finder, which is autosomal testing. With the Y-DNA, it's whatever the male's surname is. That's what the Y-DNA follows.
I'd like to direct a question in the first instance to Gerard, and I'd like contributions from the other members of the panel. We heard a presentation yesterday from Tyrone Bow on sort of association of names and DNA with the land, which is a big thing in Ireland. And he made the point that people on the land have been farming the land for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And I just wonder, do you see a synergy between a variety of ways of approaching the genetic evidence and genealogy evidence to actually get a very clear picture of who lives, where?
As Maurice said in his very first presentation, we're sort of handicapped in Ireland. That in 1922, a lot of our records were burned, and in many periods in history, we had various disasters regarding records. However, we do have a lot of information out there, which is gradually coming online. We have the 1911, 1901 census of the actual people, but we also do have summaries of some of the previous censuses, 1891, and so on, so some of the previous ones. So these haven't really been used on online analysis databases. I know the Tyrone's one uses 1911. He could equally well use 1901. He could use 1891, which gives the summary information by surname. So there's a lot of potential there. Another one is the places people lived, the names of people and townlands and so on and so forth. We have there's some great work being done down in Waterford, I believe, on the of entering in all of the information of Griffith valuation, all of the town names of Ireland, and they have some sample maps online, but they give it a very good level of granularity. But they haven't been tied into DNA databases so far. Once that happens, then we will be able to get down to townland level. Okay? There's some projects like ones I've been involved in, which is Ireland Reaching Out. Okay? And they have recruited volunteers from there are 3,600 parishes in Ireland. And they've recruited 800 volunteers. The goal will be eventually to have the most local person in the parish, or one with a very well-defined genealogy going back a long time, and at least 8 great-grandparents to test. So this will give us a sort of a benchmarking for each of the parishes of Ireland, and that will help tremendously. And there's another project called Irish DNA Atlas, who's doing that. Professor Bradley on Friday, he mentioned this huge corpus of genealogy which is in Ireland, and it's true. We had these scribes, monks, or bards and people who recorded this information, and in the 16th century, during the crisis of invasion, the Franciscans wrote it all down, and it's in a work. It's by Dubfric McPhershuk. It was 3,600 pages. It was translated in 2004. It's in a great big book, but no one has ever put it online. Right? It's all there, but it's never been used. And this work has to be done. And once that's done, then we can link into the traditional Gaelic names, the clans, and the townlands in which they came from. And finally, we're still, this is an evolving science. I like to work with SNPs, or helper groups, and we can think of, the next generation of sequencing will get us down to, as mentioned earlier, you're talking about 3 generations per SNP, or roughly 100 years per SNP. Once we get down to that level, and we're not so far off, then we will be able to count the SNPs back. It's like a family tree, except it's we call it the phylogenetic tree. Once we get to that stage, we'll just be able to count back and say, this was the ancestor, this was the match, and this was the time frame. And finally, there was one final thing, but I think it's...
It'll come to you. It'll come to you. Talking about other synergies, what Tyrone did was very clever, because he didn't just use the 1911 census for the surnames, but it was the surnames of the farmers in the 1911 census. So these would have been the people that had inherited the land for many, many generations. There are other possible ways that we could map things, and certainly I would recommend that everybody go to the Trinity College website that has the Civil Survey and the Downs Survey. They've got wonderful maps there. They look at who owned the land pre-Cromwell, who owned the land after Cromwell. So you're comparing 1640 with 1670, and you can see a huge change in land ownership in those 30 years. And those maps are superb, and they will map the old maps from 1670 or so onto the current Google Maps. So you'll be able to see exactly where the townland was and how it changed hands. But keeping on the subject of synergy, where do you think we're going to... Is there going to be any kind of linguistic... I'm just thinking about archaeology, linguistics, and genetics. That's how we usually we try and mix the 3 together. And how would we do that with the ancient Irish clans? Would there be a role for ancient DNA to play? Are we going to start digging up our ancient kings down in Munster?
That's a good point.
I suggested to Dan that I know some
Take the
graves we
microphone.
could rob. But at this point, no, I don't think we will. I know Gerard has one more point that he remembered, but as long as I have this, I'll just mention. What you were talking about with land and the people who owned it and that, for the most part, remember about... People who farmed it, right. Well, I think Origins focuses on the people who actually owned it. But at any rate, for 50% or so of a surname, they have a match, and they know who they belong to, and it isn't really an issue. If you have a name where you don't have any matches, then going in that direction might be helpful, or not necessarily going in Tyrone's direction, but even doing your own research from a standpoint of identifying where there are people close to where your family used to live, to see whether you can find out who you belong to. So I have a very interesting example, and I'll try to speak it quickly because I think it's interesting in my O'Donoghue project. We had one group of families who know their O'Donoghus, and they had a family history of their old auntie had told them more or less exactly where the family farm had been. Now, I talked to one of the descendants. He gave me the information. I went and talked to a local O'Donoghue lady that lived basically across the road from where the farm would have had to have been from the information that the old auntie provided her nieces and nephews. They went and asked the farmer, who is still an O'Donoghue, if he would be kind enough to give them a swab to test his DNA, and they did. He is not remotely related to them. But that's the only possible farm in that little townland that their family could have been from. So what does that mean? I don't know. The funny thing is that he was an I haplotype, but there was another fellow in our project who comes from Cork, who is very closely related to him. So what does that mean? I don't know.
Sorry, just on the mapping. As an exercise, I took a map which had been prepared by an O'Mahony of Griffith's valuation and the numbers for each of the O'Mahonys that he found in Griffith's. And I then plotted it onto one of the maps we had up to date. It was very interesting insofar as either he got very tired of going through Griffith's valuation, or an awful lot of the O'Mahonys of West Cork and Kerry just were not there when Griffith's valuation was taken. Because most of them would have belonged to our friend at the back, the O'Mahony O'Briens up in North Cork, whereas we know that most of the O'Mahonys were in West Cork and Kerry. So Griffith's valuation is very useful, but unfortunately, remember, two things happened. First of all, there was the famine from 1845 to 1852. That cleared a lot of the land. And then my O'Mahonys would have been at Powlagour, Incheens and Derryconnechy, and the Earl of Kenmare decided, A, to build a lovely road, a new road from Killarney to Kenmare, and then to develop a deer park for his friends, and the land was cleared. So my O'Mahonys would not have appeared, although they had about 6,000 acres. Don't get excited, there were 3 mountains in the middle of them. But they had, on paper, 6,000 acres or thereabouts done in that area. They do not appear on Griffiths. So you have to be very cautious. And another final example for me is the Lord of Kilmeaky, right? Kilmichael and that general area, right? The Elizabethan dispossessions meant that any link with that land was broken. He fought it for years and, in fact, for generations thereafter, but the title was never restored. So the link with the land was deliberately broken in terms of the old chiefs, and many of the families were clustered around the chieftains. So, the policy worked, dispossession worked, and then it was only added to by our troubles in the Customs House and thereafter. Okay, thank you.
Gerard, you had remember that point you wanted to make?
Yeah, one thing on the Griffiths valuation, we're really only seeing the Griffiths valuation snapshot from the 1880s almost, whereas the real work was done even prior to the 1850s, and they will all be coming online free of charge at the end of the year into January. So that'll be a big step forward, right? Secondly, there's this huge warehouse down in Portlaoise, which contains all of the Land Commission records, tons and tons and tons of documents, controlled by the Irish government. They won't let you look at them because apparently they were given in care of the government by the landlords. But they haven't sorted this out to say we own them, right? Make them available.
Well, as this is going on YouTube, would you like to make a plea?
Yes, please lobby. You are entitled to look at them. If you have if you can trace your ancestry back to the landlord, I believe, or if you get your local solicitor to give you a little note to say you have to do further research, okay? However, we shouldn't have to go to solicitors to get to see these things. They should just be indexed. I believe they are indexed or indexed by Anatol. They should just be put online.
Sounds like a very good suggestion to me.
And the final one, on the ancient DNA, you're absolutely right. This would be very, very important. And we should look at tracing back to the old kings of Ireland. My particular wish list would be to, in Iona, in the graveyard of Iona in Scotland, you have the 50 kings of Scotland from Kenneth MacAlpine to Malcolm III, via Macbeth and Duncan. They're all sitting there in unmarked graves because all the grave markings have worn off and no one bothered to map them out. And it would be great to see, and they're kings of Ireland, Scotland and Norway. Right? I would also like to test for the Eli O'Carroll kings who are lying in Sarkiron. We know exactly where they are, but you know, I don't know if ethically we're allowed to do.
Well, some dark night with a couple of shovels, we might head down there. Right, there's a question here at the back.
Earlier, when someone was talking about the O'Driscoll, there was a remark about something about the Picts on there, something. I just wanted to ask the general question. Is there a DNA connection between the Picts from Scotland up there somewhere and the Celts, or are they just a subgroup of another group?
Right.
And the other thing I just wanted to say is I always thought the O'Driscolls were Vikings myself. You know what I mean? They were just, you know, couriers, you know, sea couriers.
Well, the argument could be that the I-haplo groups are Viking, and that the Picts did come from the Scandinavian countries. I mean, that's just a possibility. It's hard to know for sure. Anybody else?
Yeah, Britain's DNA did a mapping of that, and they have what was called Picty. I don't know if it's accurate. I don't necessarily agree with all of their labels, but they have one which is called Hebridean Viking L165, and I believe there's a Pictish one here. I will find it on this list, and I'll let you know afterwards.
Any other questions? Even general questions? Paddy Waldron.
I'm going to get technical now. Dan Bradley on Friday said if you do a 17 marker test, there are 5 to the power of 17 possible outcomes. Where does the number 5 come from?
I'm trying to remember what exactly he said. If you did a 17 marker test, you have 5 to the...
5 possible values of each of the 17 markers.
I'm no statistician. I won't make any comment.
If you said 4, I would have said CNGT.
Sure. I guess the 17 markers refers to the number of markers that Dan was using in
that's what they
17
tested
STRs.
in the Trinity study.
The forensic genealogists, they like the 17 marker test, right? Because they have to have...
The 5 is the number that doesn't...
Yeah, they have to have certain levels of quality, scientific levels of quality, because this is proving court cases and so on and so forth. We are way, way, way beyond the 17 marker test. We're up to 111 in STRs, and in SNPs we're doing millions, we're doing tens of millions.
The other thing I can think of is in terms of if you have 17 markers, then what it's suggesting from what Dan said, and I don't actually remember what he said, but each of these markers, each of these 17, can have a range of values. And if each of the 17 markers could have a range of 5 values, then you could get 5 to the power of 17. That's my only...
What are the 5 values?
That was also my understanding, that looking at those values, that you had at each marker you had no mutation, or you had 1 mutation either way, or you had 2 mutations either way. That's at the time. That's how I interpreted it. So he ruled out the possibility, and it is quite rare that you'd have 3 mutations away. Again, when you're going back to a baseline of maybe what I called L21 or Atlantic modal haplotype, that would be the norm. And at the time, that's how I thought he meant it. Yeah.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Nigel. Any other questions? Yes, we have a question here from James.
Yes. Kind of a question and a comment, but I think I myself had started with the idea that I'm doing my DNA testing for my comparative results to common ancestors or common ancestral line to currently living people, and where are my genetic cousins, where are the results of my great-grandfather's children, are they still alive and are they connected? And then on the academic side, I see what it looks like an opposite polar view of trying to collect all this in aggregate and make much larger definitions of what it is. So, I'm happy to provide my results, as I'm sure others who have been tested, to contribute to this haplogroup understanding, haplotypes in particular. But how does this all kind of get mixed together? Is it through, I'm not beginning to understand, I guess it is through
these organizations that exist in family tree DNA. You know, the surname projects, this kind of thing. But you know, I look at my results and I say, okay, I'm an N269. I still don't know if does L21 mean anything to me. It seems like a bit of a gap because of the nomenclature between my results. I've been more interested in the STRs, but I have gotten SNPs, and so I'm trying to figure out how do we collectively, or how do I maximize the results of my test.
I think one of the best ways is to actually join the projects, have a relationship with your project administrator, but also you'll find, and certainly for the Munster Irish, I think the project administrators have written up the summary of the project results in a very elegant way, and it's probably one of the most elegant projects that is available on the Family Tree DNA website. So certainly reading what the project administrators have done, but in addition to that, there's a lot of mailing lists which may be specific to your specific SNP or haplogroup, and you should join them. And if you've got questions, then you can put them to the mailing list. And it's a group of interested individuals with the same kind of genetic signature that you have, who maybe have a little bit more experience or knowledge, and by just sharing that knowledge, you actually get a lot of information. There's also Facebook pages, such as the one that Michael has set up for Irish DNA, and these are just as forums where a group of interested individuals can come along, share experiences, ask questions, and benefit from each other's knowledge. So certainly I would join Irish DNA, Michael's group, and there's a variety of other Facebook groups that you could join. Best thing to do is to actually Google your particular haplogroup, and add in Facebook and see if there's a particular group set up for that. Would the panel like to add to that?
Well, I would suggest, are you a Munster man? All right. Well,
from a very small peninsula in the Galway area in Ross.
Right. Well, I'm sure that the three of us collectively would suggest that if you're interested, you could email us, tell us what project you're in so that we can take a look at your haplotype and then perhaps give you some suggestions on projects that might be of value to you particularly. And then you can start the process and learn from there. As Morris has pointed out, the administrators for all of these projects are generally really very helpful. And if they can't help you, they could perhaps suggest that, well, you should join this project and get this checked out. Or they might suggest, well, if you take this SNP test, this might be worthwhile. You ask and you will find.
Similar to what I walked into this trick waterways through, so apologies, but our friend here has the same idea as what I have. I got my DNA tested a couple of weeks ago with a view to tracing, let's say, possible connections in America. I'm O'Keefe from Cork. If you want my information, tell me who I can send it to, and we can make contact. But I'll have to leave now very, very soon, so if I could go up to you and give me the contact details, or let's
join our project.
How?
Munster Irish. You have a business card. Yeah. We'll get you a business card.
Very good, thank you. Do you?
James was just saying there a moment ago about trying to determine further down his haplogroup. Apart from testing, you can also use free predictor tests on the internet, and there's also Y-search where you can compare your nearest matches to try and determine a marker further down.
You have done Y-search, yeah. Again, that's a free database. Anybody can upload it. Any other questions? Any general questions about DNA? Yeah, another one here.
Earlier on, one of the ladies said, you were talking, she said, what about the women? And you said, well, this is about the Munster men. And I was just cogitating, because I was thinking about the Irish claim some connection with a pharaoh's daughter called Scotia. And she's down south, isn't she? She's down in Kerry.
Well, yeah, she supposedly came along with some of her sons, and yeah, she's buried down there someplace.
So if there was a mitochondrial test, surely would something kind of point to an individual like her?
It's conceivable.
And
If she was, now we're talking myth here, but if she was Egyptian, she would have mitochondrial DNA that would more than likely fit into that category, although I have to admit a lot of the pharaohs were Greek. But yeah, we don't know exactly where she was buried. We're certainly not going to be able to dig up her grave to find out. But yes, in principle, that is quite possible.
And just on a technical level, presumably the Greek pharaohs only turn up from about 300 BC, and the other 3,000 pharaohs are Egyptian. Would that be a fair comment?
I'm not knowledgeable enough to give you a date frame. I'm sorry. Somebody
Anybody
else
want
might?
a chance to add?
Well, they tested Tutankhamun, right? But they didn't release his helpful group. I wonder why. And some of the people watching it, they showed some vague sine waves on the screen, hoping people wouldn't be able to interpret it. And some people said, well, that looks like R1B. But R1B shouldn't have been there at that time, right? But anyhow, they haven't published the helpful group at the moment. On the question of Kerry, it's very interesting because in the Bronze Age, you had a place in Kerry which was called Ross Island. This was one of the biggest bronze mines in Europe at the time, copper mines. And the other one was down on the at Tuevela, near Tartessos. And that was, which is now called the Rio Tinto Valley. Right? Now that is the biggest copper mine of the ancient world. And we know there's a lot of traffic between those different places in the Bronze Age. And the most recent studies of Professor John Koch, he has found several hundred stelae with ancient writing, Tartessos writing on it, and his latest theory is that this is actually Celtic writing. So watch this space.
Any other questions there? No? Paddy, you have a question?
I could keep asking questions all day. I'm just thinking back through my immediate family tree and looking at how many of my male ancestors in recent generations have Y-DNA, which has already died out, and how many of my female ancestors in recent generations have mtDNA, which died out. Have we any idea, when we're talking about ancestors thousands of years ago, what proportion of the population that was around 500 years ago has nobody carrying that Y-DNA or mtDNA anymore?
Very good question. This brings us to the bottleneck and the population explosion type of effect. Does anybody want to address that?
Well, there's always going to be a certain number of lines that either daughter out or son out. Yeah. There's no real way of knowing what we might have lost if they're gone, which is unfortunate.
If we collect enough recent data, we can do some estimation.
Well, it's a very interesting question because because with a lot of this DNA that we're doing today, we're testing present-day populations, and we're extrapolating from the genetic pattern of present-day populations. We're extrapolating back to the past. The other approach, of course, is to dig up ancient DNA and see who actually did live there, because, of course, the present-day population pattern has been influenced by migrations, by people moving from one part of the world to another, and it doesn't necessarily reflect accurately what was there 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. So I think it's important that we take a two-prong approach. We use the ancient DNA and we use the modern DNA. And Dan Bradley said that in about 2 years' time, we're going to have a map of Europe based on ancient DNA. So that will be very interesting to compare the ancient DNA map with the present DNA map.
I think an answer to your question that it is possible to give you an answer for that, but we are not professional geneticists, and you know, we're an engineer, we're a retired lecturer, and whatever Elizabeth decides to describe herself as a chair as well. So we're not professional geneticists, but statistically, that they will give you statistics that could perhaps give you an idea on that.
One brief comment, just to illustrate your point. In your recent study, again, 2 weeks ago, there are 3 major Neolithic expansions globally. The one in Europe was that of Anatolia, which was R1b, which is our dominant alpha group here. The one in Africa was the Bantu, associated with the Bantu Arabs people, expansion, and the third one was in China, associated with the Han people. And the study of last week identified 3 founding fathers of that Han expansion, of the 1.4 billion Chinese population. And of course, much later, in the Mongolian population, there was an expansion, as Professor Bradley mentioned, associated with Genghis Khan. And we have our own example of founding father effect here in Ireland, which was the expansion associated with M222 related to Nile of the 9 hostages. So, baby, or whoever it was, or his ancestor, whoever that was. So these were founder effects, and they displaced other alpha groups or even population like G, which was probably the dominant alpha group in Neolithic Europe, has virtually disappeared from Western Europe now, and you find it in Sardinia and places like that. So yes, there was a founder effect explosion which displaced other people.
Great. Any other questions?
As who?
Caractacus from Tacitus.
That's going so far back. Who would know?
Yeah, I know. It just seems like Connacht and Caractacus seems like the Latin version of the Gaelic name for a lineage.
There's that possibility.
Yeah.
There's no reason to discount any of these theories at this stage. It's all possible.
Oh, how would you go about finding that out?
Oh well, that's a very good question.
That's your PhD thesis.
Pure myth. Very pure.
Another question?
Has there been or is there plans for extracting DNA from any of the bog mummies that have been found? Go back to about 3000 BC in Ireland.
I actually talked to the curator of the bog body exhibition, and she said it is highly unlikely that although the water in the bogs preserved because there's no oxygen in the bog environment, it preserves them so they have very leathery skin, and the most recent one was Cashel Man, who's 4,000 years old, right, found near Cashel, which said it's virtually impossible to extract DNA because the term she used was it's stewed over the hundreds, thousands of years, and the ancient DNA is no longer present. You know?
Yeah, the cheddar man.
That was what
But he isn't a bog body, that was a skeleton.
That's true.
Yeah.
It was also maternal. I mean, mitochondrial DNA. It wasn't Y DNA that they found. That's much easier to extract from a sample than the Y DNA, unfortunately.
There is a website for somebody perhaps can tell me what the website name is of Ancient DNA, which records where they have examined ancient bones. It's like the Tsar of Russia and people going back in time. And there's a whole list of investigations worldwide that have occurred, and somebody has put that onto a website. I'm sorry, I don't know who exactly was responsible, and I can't remember the name of it.
Gene Manco.
ISOG.
Oh, it's on the ISOG one, is it?
ISOG has an ancient DNA page.
Right, that's the one. Thank you very much.
Let me put you on to the expert. This is Catherine Borge, who's director of ISOG.
You need to give it to me. So ISOG, International Society of Genetic Genealogy, has pages for ancient DNA, famous DNA, Neanderthal DNA. I think there's one more.
Free DNA.
Yeah, free DNA. But we also have a wiki too that's very helpful, especially for those of you starting out. Oh, and the ISOG tree is probably the most up-to-date white chromosome tree out there. So it's isog.org is the URL, and then there's click-throughs to all the links on the site. Thanks, Marcus.
Everyone should join ISOG. Just to add to that, Gene Manco, who has just published her book. It's called Ancestral Journey. It's probably one of the best, most up-to-date ones up to date. Very easy to read, very easy to understand. And she also has a website called buildinghistory.org, and she has a very comprehensive list of ancient DNA.
Right, well, it is. Oh, there's one final question.
What do we know about the technology that's being developed to produce these results for individuals, and is that the driver of bringing the cost down, or is it just the general population? There's so many people now that are driving the cost down.
No, well, there is competition between different commercial companies that definitely has an effect to the benefit of the participants. But as well, yes, as you say, the technology is improving all the time. Dr. Bradley indicated his anticipation that the ancient DNA will be able to be sequenced because the technology is coming there to do so, and it's also affordable in a way that it hadn't been in the past. What was it? Was it 100,000 or something to do a full genome sequence in the beginning, or was it even more than that?
3.7 billion. Okay, the Human Genome Project cost $3.7 billion 10 years ago. The payback in the 10 to 15 years since then, or the benefit derived, is approaching $1 trillion now, which apparently is the highest payback of any government project ever in the history of scientific projects. The evolution of I've worked in technology for the last 30 years. We work on a principle called Moore's Law, which means that you double productivity, or the price halves every 2 years, and the capacity doubles every 2 years. This is Moore's Law, and it's been true for the last 30 years. Genomic evolution makes that look like a snail's pace. It's going much, much faster, and the price is coming down faster.
Just say one or two words on that. I think I mentioned it earlier on. There's a new company that was started relatively recently by Justin Allen Lowe. It's called the Full Genome Corporation. To get a full wide genome test done would have cost you $3.7 billion. The current offer for the early takers is $1,250, and it will increase to $1,500 if you're not in the first 100 or two. But just compare the prices. I've had my test done, and you can see that the prices will be coming down. So it's amazing how much more discoveries will be made in the next 2 to 5 years.
Have you got your results yet?
I thought I'd have them for this weekend. Unfortunately, that's the other point. The reason why the price is down as well is that the Chinese have invested so much money in the lab for DNA testing. It's amazing. So the choice was being made between the lab at UCLA and I think the lab in Shanghai. Is it? BGI, yeah. So here we have a choice. Do you want speed and low cost, or do you want high quality and slower delivery? But these are the choices. But the capacity is there, the technology has developed, but it is going to continue, as Ger said, at almost an exponential rate. So stand by. But join now and get in early, and you'll be one of the leaders.
And will you come back next year and tell us what your results are?
I certainly will.
Good. Well, listen, it's been a fantastic 3-day conference. It's been great to have. I see so many people in the audience who've stayed the course for the 3 days. So I really want to thank all of you who've attended any of the lectures and for asking your questions and for contributing to the science of genetic genealogy in Ireland. I want to thank our sponsors, Family Tree DNA, who have the stand downstairs and who have offered to the Irish public DNA testing for the first time directly at Back to Our Past. And I also have to thank the International Society of Genetic Genealogy under the magnificent directorship of Catherine Borge, who has given 2 lectures during the conference, but also Daryl Oakley-Teat, who has been working on the stand, Cynthia Wells, who's been working on the stand, John Blair as well, all of them ISOG members, and at Family Tree DNA, the managing director, Bennett Greenspan, Max Blankfield, and technical and logistical support from Janine McLeod. So all that remains for me to do is to thank our wonderful panel of experts, Gerard Corcoran, Irish representative of ISOG, Elizabeth O'Donoghue-Ross, Finbar O'Mahony, Nigel McCarthy, and a great big thank you from me, Maurice Gleeson.
Before you go, I think we should also give Maurice a great big thank you.
Yes.
That was great. Thank you very much.
Nice.